You voted for it, and now it has arrived. Change begins now.
There is going to be yet another new prime minister for the United Kingdom after the general election has decided that Keir Starmer's centre-right Labour Party is now in a position to form a majority government after the collapse of the Conservatives that saw their vote largely split between themselves and the Reform Party, which is a far-right party, and formerly the Brexit Party. So, let's break a bit of this down because I find the results here to be rather interesting. As even though Labour is in the position here to form, as you see, a majority with 326 seats needed, they're at 412. Even though they're in this position, and it looks like there was just a resounding victory here for Labour compared to the elections in 2019 and 2017, their vote total is really not all that strong. So sitting at about 9.5 million here, compare that to 2017, where it was almost 13 million, even though Labour lost that race. So as Lefty Stats here breaks down, total popular vote won by Labour in 2015, 9.3 million. 2017, 12.9 million. That's under Jeremy Corbyn. 2019, 10.3 million under Jeremy Corbyn. Now, 9.7 million under Keir Starmer. Starmer got 500,000 fewer votes than Corbyn in 2019 and about 3 million fewer votes than Corbyn in 2017. So, before I get to what happened here, Jeremy Corbyn has won his re-election, so he was forced out of Labour because he's someone who actually cares about people, but he was forced out and had to run as an independent. Didn't matter. He still won his seat, and it wasn't even close. Won it by a wide margin. And I want to break exactly what happened here down. So, as the Guardian here writes, fears of a split in the right-wing vote were realized, with Reform's vote share potentially costing the Conservatives in 180 seats. In other words, had all Reform votes gone to the Conservatives in these seats, they would have won them. This split here is incredible because even though Reform was a deciding factor for the result in the election, hurting the Conservative Party, you have to scroll down in order to see that they only won 4 seats. The same amount of seats that the Greens won. Yet, they had a massive impact on the success or lack thereof of the Conservatives. This little clip here from BBC, this is John Curtis.
But for the rise of the Labour Party in Scotland, which has been truly spectacular, we will be reporting that basically Labour's vote has not changed from what it was in 2019. In Wales, it's actually down, and England, it is barely changed. One has to say, this does look like an election that the Conservatives have lost, and have lost primarily because of the votes they have lost to Reform, which has cost the party seat after seat after seat. Around 2/3 of the seats that the Conservatives have lost are seats where if Reform voters had voted Conservative, they would still have hung on to.
All right, so the reason I keep hammering this point home is because it should be clear that the Labour Party did not win because of their center-right politics. They did not win because of Keir Starmer's agenda. They won because the Conservatives imploded. So, I'm seeing headlines, and this is mostly from international media. As far as British media goes, it appears they are very honest about what went on here and about the collapse in the Conservatives, as opposed to it being, Labour winning. But I saw a headline on CBC, for example, in Canada, where they frame this as a resounding victory for the Labour Party. But it's not really a resounding victory. They won by default. Labour, with their center-right politics, won because the Conservative vote was split. They won with a lower turnout, with a lower vote share than they lost with in 2017 and 2019. So just to be clear on that, the vote share, 33.7% this time. In 2017, they had 40% of the vote. A much higher percentage of the vote, yet still lost. So again, this is about the implosion of the conservatives. Now, the turnout here, which of course, not surprising considering the result, but lowest turnout since 2001, with an estimated 60% turnout. And as well, just to make it, to put a pin on this point, 3/4, 73% of the public say the biggest factor behind Labor's landslide victory was wanting the end of a conservative government rather than a desire for a Labor government. So again, over a decade of conservative rule, they wanted the party out. That was the intention here. The other big story that I think is maybe not getting enough play, as far as what I'm hearing from those in the UK, is the fact that Greens won 4 seats. The same amount of seats as Reform. Yet this is getting less attention. Now you could argue, well, Reform has more votes total, I think about 4 million votes compared to Greens, which are hovering around 1 million. We can double check that here. So Greens around 2 million, Reform around 4 million. Yet still the same amount of seats, which I would argue means the Green Party, even though they had less resources, had better strategy in terms of knowing where to focus their attention. They wanted to win these 4 seats. They won these 4 seats. If Reform, now look, you could argue maybe Reform's intention was to simply get rid of the Conservative Party and put in a Labour Party. Or maybe they wanted to win more seats. And if that was their intention, which you would think a party in a parliamentary system, the intention is to win a lot of seats, then their strategy didn't work out too well. Because even though they had more resources, more money, more media attention, they only won the same amount of seats as the Greens. So to that point, Aaron Bastani, who is of Navarra Media, which did, from what I saw, fantastic work covering this on YouTube and elsewhere. But he writes here, the Greens won just 4 seats. Reform just won 4 seats, but the legacy media had already decided its agenda before we had those results. So guess which party gets the most attention? Here's a little clip.
Rise of Reform this morning, with party leader Nigel Farage finally becoming an MP and wasting no time saying, we're coming for Labour. This is just the first step in something that will stun all of you. Words from his victory speech this morning.
Look at how all of that, the attention put on Nigel Farage, the framing of this entire story. They're the threat. They got their 4 seats and they're coming for Labour. Or you could frame it a different way. Reform, 4 seats, despite all of the free media, despite all of the resources, got as many seats as the Greens with far less resources, far less media. That's another way to frame this that I think is maybe a little more honest. Still, I do think it's important to note the rise of Reform in the implosion of the Conservatives, but really only in that context. It doesn't make sense to treat them as this incredibly powerful force yet. That doesn't mean they won't continue eating into the Conservative vote, which I'm sure is possible, if not likely. But, just tap the brakes a little bit here. Now, another great point. 5 pro-Gaza independents have now won, with Khalid Mahmoud out in Birmingham. The media class mocked this stuff for months. Quote, nobody cares about foreign policy. Who is laughing now? So this was apparently a big dividing factor for some who were maybe former Labour MPs, like Corbyn, for example, who actually care about human rights, ran independent campaigns, and won their campaigns. People, of course, it's going to depend on the riding, but when it comes to people who are more on the left spectrum, people care about human rights. They care about the treatment of others. And when they see the mass atrocities being committed by an ally of their own government, that's going to be an issue for them if their government, if their representative is not speaking out about that. I'll leave you with this. So I'll link this below the video. This is from Mehdi Hassan at Zateo. Good riddance to the worst British government of my lifetime. So 14 years of Tory scandals, controversies, and excess death finally come to an end. So just to hit on some of the points, because again, this is really about the Conservatives losing. And they've been there so long and have overseen so much, including the disaster of Brexit. They drove 900,000 children into poverty since 2010, worst squeeze on UK wages since Napoleon, starved the National Health Service of funding, including almost tripling the wait list there, 300,000 excess deaths from austerity, and more people died of COVID, or I should say one of the worst death rates in Europe from COVID. So again, I'll link to this below. Zateo and Mehdi Hassan generally does fantastic work. It's really, I don't follow British politics too closely, but I'm curious to see what's going to come out of this in terms of, is reform going to continue growing their support at the expense of the Conservatives? Are the Greens going to be able to take advantage of the situation with Labour being further right than they definitely were under Corbyn? It's a lot of stuff to keep track of, because there's a lot of movement in British politics in a way that I don't think we've really seen for a few years.